And now we have to do the classic, just waiting for people to get here.
Very natural, very chill.
Now. See, I didn't tweet that this was about to start. I should actually probably do that because of aforementioned other life event. So I'm like, is anybody going to show up? We'll see. Who's all here? If not, I'll just have a nice little chat with you about a book.
It will live on the internet for people to watch later.
Exactly. I feel like that's what most people end up doing anyway, because this is like somewhat during business hours. All right. I'm just going to tweet this out real quick. Super professional streaming behavior. All right. I've tweeted it. And now it's real. All right. We've got Matt. We've got Shiko. We've got Ishan. Tell me if I am pronouncing everybody's name right. I finished the book 12 minutes ago. Nice. I have okay. All right. People are filtering in. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to another installment of the Hopepunk Book Club. Today, I am joined by Mari, also known as My Name is Marinez around the internet. Mari, for people who don't know you, who are you? What do you do?
Well, what a question. I mean, I'm probably here because Taylor and I are friends. We've known each other online for a long time, but also I review books online. That is primarily what I do around the internet. I talk about other media as well, with a website that I host with a previous guest on the book club, Nicole, and I have Snark Squad. And then under My Name is Marinez, I have a YouTube and a TikTok and a Twitter and an Instagram where I talk about books and other media. So
all very excellent content streams. I've been really enjoying your TikToks this year. And probably many of you know Mari already from around the internet. I feel like it's like there's like this era of YouTube, corner of YouTube, small constellation that a lot of folks we are also joined by my parents' two dogs that are crawling all over me right now. All right, we got both of them. So apologies for the terrible lighting and production quality on my side. I am hanging out in Wisconsin, waiting for my niece to be born. So we are improvising here. But since everybody is here to talk about The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, and also creating a better future, we can get right into it. So I'm seeing folks here have mostly read the book, although if you haven't, you are totally welcome to be here. I think we're going to be talking about a lot of themes that are just sort of relevant to living in the world in 2022. So I don't think I've had to read the book to understand it, but quick summary for folks who might just be jumping in. The City We Became is the first in a duology. The second part I haven't read yet. I've been saving it until we have this discussion, wherein it's set in New York City. There are a bunch of different protagonists and sort of perspectives that we jump between, but it's sort of a story about New York City being born and embodied in 6 different people, one for each borough and then one for the city itself. But as it sort of struggles to become itself. It the city, the people of the city are fighting back against an unknown force. Um, and so it's sort of talking about like uh, how do people interact with the place that they live? How do we work together in the places that we live? And what are the things that sort of keep us apart or make our communities weaker? Um, so that's like a super, super, super glossed over summary, but I guess I'll start out. Well, do you have anything you want to add, or should we just jump right into the big question?
No, I think we can jump right in. I mean, it is like a summary of what happened, but this is I mean, that's it, right? It's not like
Right.
a plot-driven sort of book. We are really just sitting in sort of that like, how do they work together? How do they come together? How do they defeat this like evil and big bad and let the city be born? There isn't much else, I guess, plot point wise, but there is a lot there in terms of like what
Right.
it's saying.
Right. I think it's sort of like um it reminds me a lot of there's a bunch of like movies in this genre. I don't know what you would call it, but where it's like the same event from a bunch of different perspectives and you watch it like 5 different times. Um
Mhm.
it's like we spend a lot of time with each embodied burrow where they're just like the vibes are off, what's going on, and trying to figure out what's happening to them and what is the evil and how do they stop it. So
It's also definitely a book where, like, I think the audience knows more, I guess, than the people going through it sort of thing.
right.
Like, we're definitely more in the know in terms of, like, you guys are the city, you
Mhm.
know, like and
Right.
they spend the whole book like, "Am I a city?" And we're like, "Yes."
Right. Your name is literally Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Manhattan. Right.
So we're watching a lot of that, like, discovery, from
Mhm.
kind of the outside perspective, so
Yeah. So the big question of the Hope Punk Book Club and
Mhm.
chat, do feel free to answer this yourselves. You're encouraged to answer it in the chat. But what did this book make you believe about the future?
This is really hard for me. I was, starting to tell you a little bit before we jumped on to, like, say because I feel like that this was really, really grounded in the present for me, like, the story
Mm,
itself felt like it was very much just I don't know, it felt more contemporary than, like, making me think about the future itself, and I don't know if that was just, like, a me thing,
it was
in
not
terms
Stephen.
I was like, "What is this saying about the future? This is saying about, like, now." But I think there's kind of 2 things that I came away with, but I will start with, like, the one big thing. And it was what made me realize that this was what I was taking away from this is it wasn't like how I framed the thought, but it was what I identified about the story itself. And it was that it was like incredibly earnest. Like there's something really earnest about the storytelling, and especially about like the look that Jemison has on New York, the city and the place. And like, I don't know, it just really sat in that earnest place and it made me think a lot about like earnestness in general, which I know is kind of weird to talk about like looking towards the future. But this is a conversation I've had with friends before about like cycles of being online and how this, I feel like this is so convoluted. Stay with me, everybody. So okay, so I feel like for like millennials, people who are, eh, digital natives, but we grew up with like being online. Very much the experience of being online for a while was kind of like be careful because you could be talking to somebody in their basement, sort of thing. Like everybody could be catfishing you. Like it's super dangerous online. And that was like sort of the feeling of the early internet. And then I feel like once we started getting into like our content creation era with like blogging and YouTube and all of that, there was this like push for earnestness and to be like your most authentic self online. Like
Mhm.
you had to be truly you, and a bunch of backlash against like being disingenuous online or not being your most authentic self. And I feel like we're going through a cycle now, and I don't want to like entirely put it on a generation, but it's kind of like, just Gen Z. And like, I would say this cycle of just creating things online is pushing against earnestness and like how
Mhm.
cringe it is to be like earnestly yourself, how cringe it is to be invested in things, how cringe it is to like care about anything. And so like that kind of thing is just something that I have like thought a lot about, especially because I moved to being on TikTok and seeing a lot
Mhm.
of that like sort of cringe pushback to earnestness has been just like in front of my mind. So reading this book and thinking about like how earnest it was also made me think about how like there has to be a sort of earnestness that you invest when you're talking about wanting change and when you're talking about like wanting to build a future that is hopeful. Because I was sitting there and thinking like, what is this making me think about the future other than like, I don't know, we're gonna be fighting forever, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like the forever struggles of like the things that they were going through, especially when it came to like racism and things like that. It just felt very like almost like bleak of like, okay, if this is the view of our future where we're always fighting, but there is some hopefulness in that they were able to affect change. But also like I just came away with that idea of like there has to be like that like investment in making change. And even though that this was a cast of characters that was like really messy, very complicated, they didn't always like each other. They weren't always rowing in the same direction, but there was that investment of each of them to either protect their families, protect their city, to want to affect change, to not want to die, to not want others to die. And that is kind of what I am taking away from this, that there has to be sort of like an earnest investment in the future in order to affect a change. That was very, very, I don't know if that was like super convoluted to where I
No,
ended
I like it because especially because you were talking about the like sort of the waves of internet culture, which I totally feel like I've seen too, and like I feel like I've been on the wrong side of it for a long time because I can't help but be like super earnest all the time. I'm just like, oh man, I'm like it's really uncool. Um, but yeah, I think that it for me that resonates in two ways. One with like I think a lot about the internet as a place that I live.
Mhm.
That like for a long time, I was moving around a lot. I was like, I feel like more like I live on the internet than I live in the cities that I live in. But also, I live in New York now. I'm a transplant. I've been there for 5 years. And so it made me think a lot about like New York City politics and like how um how it like even I think it connects back because um like in the early days of YouTube, it's like all the influencers moved to LA. They're all moving to New York now, like all the TikTokers that moved to New York to create content. Like
Mhm.
um it really resonated with me that like the person who was Manhattan had been in New York for a day. And like
Mhm.
even what is it that are they called the epigraph? I like the one belongs to New York instantly, one belongs to it as much in 5 minutes as in 5 years.
Mhm.
Um, I think a lot about like what um like how to be uh a good transplant. um just because like I
Mhm.
know that it's so complicated with sort of the effects of gentrification on the city and the housing crisis and all of these things. um I think it's natural and normal for humans to move around. I don't think it's helpful to just say, well, the answer is that nobody ever comes here or nobody moves. But I think that if you want to live somewhere, you need to belong there. Like you need
Mhm.
to, like, a lot of I guess, like as the characters were sort of realizing that they were the boroughs and stuff, they were like, there was a lot of language around like, oh, I belong to the city, like, um, and and I have been trying really hard to do that, like to belong to New York, where it's sort of like if you're going to be a transplant, um, like you have to invest in the community. Or even if you're not, like if you grew up somewhere and never ever moved, like I think it's important if you want to um if you want to live in a place, you have to like love it and love it with your actions in a way
Mhm.
that I think is really like hard to do in a big city like New York. I think a lot of people move there and they're just sort of like, well, it's so big. Like I just feel like I'm um, just like a speck in this entire big, huge ecosystem. Or like I don't pay attention to city politics because like whatever, it's all Democrats who live here, it doesn't matter or whatever. But it's actually really, really important to feed back into the community. Like we can't get a decent mayor for the life of us because so few people like vote in New York. And people will live in New York and vote in the place that they came from because they think it counts more
Mhm.
or whatever. But it's like, and it's not just I'm not trying to say like just vote. Um but like but getting involved in local community organizations, knowing your neighbors, um, feeding back into the community that you are extracting value out of. Um, I think is sort of what I am seeing as like the future of what I feel like I'm called to do after reading this book. But I also, I mean, to your point, um, that's also a thing that we can do in the places that we live online too. um, but yeah,
Mhm.
like thinking about what is the future of what YouTube looks like. What is the future of what the community of TikTok is, or oh my God, Twitter right now. It's like I feel like that's a big question on everybody's minds. It's like
Mhm.
how do we how do we build what was good about Twitter somewhere else? I don't. Is it possible? Is it possible to save Twitter as it is? Um, yeah, but yeah, God, that does take a lot of earnestness.
Yes, for sure. You like one of the things my experience with this book was like not it was mostly positive. There were some things that were a little bit mixed, but one of the main things that I had to just like recognize that was like keeping me at a distance is that this is like ultimately like a love letter to New York, right? An ode to New
Mhm,
York. And it's not one that is like super romanticized. It was very like
right.
clear-eyed about the good and bad of the city or whatnot. But also I hate New York. And so I was reading it, and I was just like, but after I kind of realized that, but what I appreciated as it went on is that it was a very clear-eyed look at New York. And there was even like a line that somebody says, like, everyone says that they hate New York, but nobody ever leaves it, right? Like you stay
Right.
here. And so you're just like hating it and living here. But it goes back to what you're saying is that, like, whether you hate it or love it, you need to invest in the place that you're in to affect change. And if there are
Mhm.
things that you don't like about the space that you're in, like, what are you kind of doing about that other than like staying there and talking about how much you hate it? And I really appreciated the decisions that Jemison made in terms of like who got to represent New York, because we did have, the transplant who had been there a day, and we had an immigrant, and we had like an older woman who was also like involved in the art scene, and we had somebody who was involved in like local politics or whatnot, and
Mhm.
creative. So it was like such a good like mix of characters, and it like let New York be represented by this really like this mix of characters, like I said. And but in a way that I felt like spoke to sort of that feeling that people have of like being ownership over a place, like no new friends kind of thing, this is our city
Yeah.
or whatever. And this spoke to that in a way that was like, no, the city was represented by people who, whether they lived here all their lives or not, or were invested in the city.
Right. Yeah. I think that yeah, it's funny. It's like I'm sitting and like hating on the mayor and like I will, you know, complain about the the rental situation in New York all day long, but I'm here in Wisconsin right now and I'm like, "Oh my God. I want to go back. I miss
I mean,
transit. I miss not having to drive. I miss walkable cities."
mhm,
Like and
mhm,
yeah, it's like I mean, it's obviously like every place is not for everyone. But I
Mhm.
do think that you're right that it gives kind of an honest look. It's not just like New York, it's magical in the way
Mhm.
that like a lot of the like New York TikTokers do. um,
Mhm.
but I also really did appreciate, I think, that it refused to satisfy my desire for everybody to come together and like become all of the limbs of the transformers at the end.
Yes.
Like the fact that it doesn't get resolved, they sort of beat back the evil to a point where it's contained, but like they never meet Staten Island, they never get them all together, they
Mhm.
never entirely resolve it. Now there's a second book, so like we'll
Mhm.
see what happens, but I think that that is honest about some of the tensions that exist in the city between different communities, and um it also, I think, really felt relevant to all the discourse about cities that's happening right now, where it's like people go on Fox News and they're like, it's you know it's like awful there and everybody's just stabbing people on the street, and I would never go to a city, they're all dangerous and terrifying, and it's like it's just a place, like
Mhm.
I think that including that perspective is part of what can eat a city from the inside, is sort of the distrust in the sort of social contract that we all have with each other, living, on top of each other as we all do. I think was real, if not satisfying.
Yes. I think that was like the second major thing that I kind of took away from this, and I alluded to it a little bit. But it that sort of thing of it like being really real about, some people kind of overcame that distrust, and some people managed to figure out how to work together, but not all of them, right? Staten
Mhm.
Island to the end, her and her like, racism and xenophobia, like till the
Mhm.
end or whatnot. But the thing that this like really made me think a lot about was like it there was certainly hope here because they did indeed like beat back the evil, and they did manage to see the like birth of the city or whatnot. So there was some hope, a lot of hopefulness, even in like the way that they dealt with each other, and they ultimately like supported each other, uh, and whatnot. But the other thing that this is like telling me about the future is kind of like that we're going to be fighting forever sort of thing. Like there is always going to be like some battleground, that we're, especially kind of, I guess, going hand in hand with what we're talking about of being like earnestly invested in the places that you're in. And if you are, there's always going to be room for improvement, right? And so
Mhm.
sometimes when you're talking about Hopepunk or even like utopian or things like that, like it can paint like the picture of a future where there is no more work to be done. And
Right.
this was very clearly like, no, 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 no. Like
Yeah.
not only is there always like is there currently work to be done, like there will probably always be work to be done. And so that is that's what I'm taking away from this.
Yeah, it's like it's something that I've heard a lot in like from like climate change communicators too, which that both scares me and gives me comfort, which is just like we will never be done working on this, like we'll never have solved it. Um,
Yes.
but the flip side of that that actually gives me a lot of comfort is like we'll never be totally licked either. Like we'll never have just like lost and it's over.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
like so I think that's what I like. It's like when I started like writing out like what I thought the Hope Punk Book Club is like I don't want the Hope Punk Book Club to be about hope in the sense that we go someday we'll all work it out, and that means we can just sit and wait for that to happen. Um,
Mhm.
I much prefer a more realistic view, which is just like there's always going to be problems that we have to work on, but that also means that we always can be working on them,
Yeah.
I guess.
I really like too that this like said to us like in multiple times that like there will be people who are not on board, right? That are not
Right.
about it in terms of working. And it was kind of reiterated to, I think, Manhattan, where it was like you could leave and
Mhm.
somebody else will be chosen to take your spot, basically. And then we see it again towards the end with Staten Island, where she decides not to join. And they're like, Jersey City, where you at? Like, and
Yeah.
so some like takes the spot. So that is also like really
Mhm.
hopeful, I think, in terms of like, yes, we're like in this constant like effort of working and trying to affect change. But there will always be people to present themselves is kind of the message that I thought was here
Mhm.
too, that are willing, to step up and fight. So I thought that that was really hopeful as well.
Yeah. I think probably my biggest qualm with the entire book was that there was a chosen one element to it. And I think it was tempered. Like the first chapter where it was like the one sort of having that initial battle, I was like, oh my God. Like I'm not
Yes.
a big chosen one fan, like trope
Mhm.
fan in general, but especially when you're trying to tell like a hope punk story, which is like I feel like I am firmly on record now where I sort of think that treating it like you have to be some kind of special person to work on problems, or like you have to be like it has to be your whole life or not, or don't even bother.
Mhm.
If you are not called from like by like a tractor beam to fix this problem, then like you are not a real activist, or like you're not your individual actions don't matter or whatever. I hate that idea because I just think that it needs to be a little bit of all of our lives. um and I think like there were some kind of hedges to the chosen one that we have six people, and then we have Jersey City come in, and there was like the cab driver who could see
Yes.
the like tentacles and stuff like that. There were other people who could see it, but not everybody could see it. um and I kind of wish that everybody could see it. I don't know. I just sort of feel like, I mean, there are definitely people who choose not to see the problems, or like there needs to be a level of denial for them to be able to carry on with their lives because there's so much all the time. But
Mhm.
I really, really don't like the idea that um only some people are capable or suited to working on building the future that we want.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think you're right. One of the things that I felt about it, like I randomly, like towards the end of the book, I was like, "What happened to Manny's roommate?"
Yes! Maybe he comes
Because
back in the next book, I don't
I
know.
it's honestly, like, there was no reason for, that person to come back. They were like, it was like a temporary sort of scene or whatnot, but there were so many people coming in and out of like, and I think it was probably trying to get to that idea of like, people doing little bits to help or whatnot. But like from a storytelling perspective, they felt like dropped threads to me in a way that I'm like, what
Mhm.
happened to that person? Or I was like, I wonder, like, he just dropped his credit card and, like, never walked away and never
Right.
picked it. This was, like, a bunch of, like, small random little things that, like, I kept thinking
Mhm.
about, and I was like, "Oh, I need to let it
Yeah,
go. These are drop threads. They do not matter."
right, right. I was just like, I've gotta hope that either some of these get picked back up, or, it'll make sense to me if I complete the duology. But, yeah, there were certain things like that. But I'm curious to know if there was anything else. You said that, like, for you, this mostly worked, but there were a couple of things that were keeping you at arm's length. Were there any other ones that we haven't covered?
So I think that, I I think that this is almost like fable-like, and a lot of times when you have stories like this where the driving thing here really is sort of like the big metaphor and the message, you kind of lose a little bit sometimes in other areas. And for me, I feel like I lost a little bit in terms of the characterization. I wish I felt like I knew the characters a little bit more. I wish I like they felt a little bit more 3D instead of like very just like their borough and sort of
Right.
those boxes or whatnot. So it was more from like a storytelling perspective, from like a novelization sort of perspective. I like this wasn't like my favorite sort of told story. I more appreciated the project of what this was and what it was trying to say than I loved the story itself.
Mm.
So you know, it was kind of like in that maybe like 4, 3.5, 4 star kind of range for me,
Mm.
where like we're obviously sitting here talking about it, like I could pick it apart. There's so much to say. But how much of this will like stick with me from a storytelling perspective, I'm not sure. So
Mm. Yeah, I did want more of an exploration of like I felt like Queens didn't get enough
mhm.
um
Yes.
body to that story. And I also feel like that's how a lot of people who don't live in Queens think about Queens, the actual borough. They're just like, yeah, it's there. It's great. I never go there because it's a pain. But like,
Yeah.
yeah, Queens. We like Queens. Um, um, yeah, and I also think about like how they all had their like they were all supposed to get um their symbolic power for how they're like able to seal up their borough, like so like the credit cards, the money for Manhattan and uh, Brooklyn. It was like her like freestyling at the evil and I guess Queens she had like the math equations,
Yes.
right? But like but like I felt like we didn't like we didn't get as much of that as I had maybe
Mm,
thought we would when the idea was introduced. Like, oh, okay, they can seal off their borough with their like magic power.
mhm.
Like, I don't know if I remember what the Bronx's was. That's maybe a me problem, but yeah,
What was the Bronx? Was it her like kicking things or something like that? Like she
it was her
talked about
boots. It was her
her
boots.
food.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But yes, like things like that where I wish it was like a little bit more explored or whatnot. Um, I also have a feeling it will go one of two ways. Either this will like sit in my brain and settle in a way where I'm like, well, no, I can't stop thinking about that. Like I'm thinking about it
Mhm.
more, or it will settle and I just like lose all the details. And
Yeah,
then I feel like then I'll be able to decide like how effective this was overall.
yeah, yeah. It's like I think that my and these dogs are like wiggling in the chair next to me. I think that I also maybe had a different experience with it because I was sitting there and like making all the like half of my notes are like about like specific like um oh this is a city council issue that I'm thinking about and stuff like um but also like it also made me think a lot about A Paradise Built in Hell, which is the last book that we read.
Mhm.
And like I don't know if there's anybody in chat who's been here for both of those and was able to. Oh yeah, Matt saying I had a fun time tying this book with the Soulnet book we read with stories on NYC response. Yeah, I have one of the passages I have you know marked here is like talking about how like the idea that evil comes from elsewhere, evil is other people, and that's like this big that's supposed to be this idea that is it Aislinn? I didn't know how to pronounce her name, but Staten Island.
Yeah.
Like what kept her from going into the city and connecting with um, her her counterparts, and that sort of being relating back to the book we read last time, which is just like every disaster has a secondary disaster, and it's what people in power think is the worst case scenario. And they think, oh, people are going to loot, people are going to behave terribly, and people are going to be, um, lawless and unruly. And so we need to protect ourselves from, these base instincts
Mhm.
where all of those sorts of um, fears actually make it harder for people to come together and take care of each other. if people in power are trying to figure out how to keep people apart because they're afraid of what would happen. Um, so yeah, I think that my experience of reading this was really, really colored by the book that we just last read. Um, and so like, yeah, I was really just like, okay, the metaphor continues, this thread continues, whereas all of the kind of other detail was able to just fall back for me.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. I listened to this on audiobook, so I literally was like, "Tell me a story."
Yeah.
Uh, which was like a different approach. And but that's the thing here is that I think that this is like layered. It does kind of have those two sides. I if I'm recalling correctly, it was Iselin because it was like a
Okay.
joke that people called her Staten Island. Uh,
Yeah.
if
Which
I
makes sense. Yeah,
remember,
they all have the
yeah,
symbolic.
if I remember correctly, that's how at least the audiobook narrator said it. But
Oh yeah, that helps.
um, but yes, the that whole idea of like, she kept saying that basically her dad always said about Staten Island that like, oh, bad things happen there too, but at least people are trying, to
Mhm.
be. And it's kind of that like, what are you even saying? Like if
Right,
it's only outsiders who do bad things, but don't get the benefit of the doubt of like trying to be good. Whereas like the bad things that are happening on the island are okay,
right,
because it's like why? Because you get to decide who's actually the bad guy in this scenario. So
right. Yeah. It was that was like a very strange thing for me to read just because um like I do and not to be all like New York again, but there's like there's like a saying that I've seen circulate around on Twitter that's like West Coasters are nice but not kind, and East Coasters are kind but not nice.
Mhm.
Um, and that's like has been very true to my experience, which is just like people don't want to like sit and make small talk with you, but like somebody will um, like I've had many times somebody like tap me on the shoulder and be like, "You dropped like your wallet or whatever," and then they just go. Like
Mhm.
it's not like people are warm and fuzzy, but like they you do take care of each other in a sense. And so it's just like what you're saying about Staten Island is true of everywhere. Like everybody's trying to be decent.
Yes.
And
But
yeah,
right, but that's the whole, like, sort of separationist thing is, like, only viewing yourself and your own and the people you decide as the ones being that are, like, good and worthy, and everybody else is an outsider and actually bad, right? They're the ones doing the actual bad, which, is, very, um, like, it cuts the work down, right? It cuts it off. It doesn't allow. That's why she didn't end up joining with everybody else, right? She was never able to get over that idea that like that anybody outside could help, that anybody outside could be good or worthy or whatnot. So
yeah. As you were saying that, it made me think a lot about like so we've been talking about like physical city dynamics, but we've also been talking about like internet culture dynamics. Um,
mhm.
that made me think about kind of this attitude that so many people have going into um like social media conversations that just assume bad faith out of everyone. And so that's how
Yes.
you get like the Twitter conversations where somebody's like, like, I love pancakes. And somebody goes, what do you mean you hate waffles?
Yes.
Like where
Yes.
there's just sort of like the idea that I'm going online to have good faith conversations, but everybody else
Mhm.
is on their worst behavior. And
Mhm.
that's sort of how I talk about, going on Twitter or using YouTube and stuff, right? It's like that I'm like, oh God, it's the hell site, but I go there, right? And it's like, well, how am I contributing to this? Or how might I be able to read other people's interactions like, you know, as coming from the same place that I'm coming from.
Yes.
That might also be a future project for me.
And I mean, it asks you to kind of question this because the thing is that there are hellish things online. That is true. We are not making
Right.
that up. And there is certainly that certainly has come from some experience, at least, of like what we've seen and experienced or whatnot. But there has to be some sort of middle ground between like being completely naive and being like, no, the internet is perfect and nobody is ever wrong, but reaching the point, like you said, where you lose sight or you automatically assume like the worst in everybody, and somehow exclude yourself from that as well. Like there is certainly middle ground between those two things, and maybe that is also like part of like how you exist in places is how do you balance, you know, not letting yourself get take advantage of, but also not approaching every situation and interaction with the worst possible interpretation, you know, already handy.
Right. Yeah. And Matt says in the chat, do you think anonymity is a part of that mindset, or people will do online what they wouldn't do in public spaces? Like I think a little bit, but I also think that like if you think about cities, like not just New York, but like any city, there's anonymity to living in a city too.
Mm.
Like there's a lot of as as part of getting by, you kind of just have to keep your blinders on and not engage with every single person you walk past, or it would be impossible um, to live your life. And in a way that can be really like comforting and freeing. Um, there's a lovely phenomenon where like you can cry on the subway or on the sidewalk and people won't bother you, and sometimes you just need that. You just need to be left alone and not have people be like, what's happening, what's wrong? It's like, I'm just having a bad day. uh, but also, you know, that can be tough where it's like if you did legitimately need help, you know, people are just going to keep walking on by. So like I don't know, like I think that anonymity can be a problem both online and in physical spaces, and that maybe a little bit of like what you're talking about with earnestness is like
Mhm.
that we need to be a little bit more we need to be a little bit more real as people in terms of like communicating earnestly about what we want to create in the world, but also just like um, uh, seeing ourselves and other people that we interact with, both in digital and physical spaces, as more fully human.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like I'm thinking about like my big project over the past 2 years has been like, okay, like I want to know my neighbors. I want to, um, you know, if some disaster were to happen, like uh, or just the disasters that we're living in continue to happen, like I want to be able to like know who on my block that I need to check in on, or know who can help me with something. um and that's maybe something that I also need in my digital communities too.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense.
So one of the kinds of offshoots of the big question that I'm curious about, what you think, Mari, and also what the chat thinks, is if we're talking about what we believe about the future, maybe that we need a little more earnestness, maybe that we need to be a little bit more um, belong a little bit more to the places that we inhabit. Um, how do we get there? What is like I'm with you that this feels way more present than future to me. Um,
Mhm.
but like if we're trying to think about a future where we are um, able to communicate earnestly, where we really are feeding back into the communities that we belong to as much as we're getting out of them. How do we get from there to here? Like, how do we get through this sort of like wall of cringe that we just can't can't accept that sort of interaction and behavior with each other?
I don't know. One thing hearing you talk though that has like really resonated with me though is really being present like in the place that you are. And so like again, this is not like a go vote kind of thing, but like
Yeah.
but like being more engaged in like local politics and local events and really belonging to that space. I think that this is something that people who organize and whatnot always really talk about, but probably we're seeing the effects of COVID in a lot of ways, of like being even more cut off from those surroundings than we probably ever were. Hearing you talk about like knowing your neighbors, I am absolutely certain that there are people in this building that I've lived in for like 4 years that I do not know. And that's so sad. Like, why not? That is that speaks to like a certain and I'm not saying I have to be like besties with everybody or whatnot, because that's also not me, but there is like a lack of being present in the space that I am in and that I'm in, that that could be definitely fixed. And I feel like if everybody did a little bit of that work, it definitely is a thing that we would see affect a big change.
Yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right when you're talking about like the effects of COVID, like not only in the sense of like not knowing your neighbors, like because I was living in an apartment building for 5 years. I just moved this last month, and as I was moving out, I like a couple of my neighbors saw like the movers coming in and out, and they're like, "Oh, you're leaving? Like I've walked past you in the hallway for 5 years, like." Um, and or not 5 years because a lot of people left my building during COVID, and the new people moved in, and because everything was weird, it's like I didn't
Mhm.
say hi to them, like we didn't stop and like introduce ourselves to each other, and so I was leaving, and it was just like, oh, like I've seen your face all this time, and I have no idea who you are. Um, but also like that's really gonna be like key to survival. I don't know. Um,
Yes.
is like knowing the people around ourselves, and like and and also like my online friendships, like I was saying to you before we started this stream, is that I was like I miss, because like I haven't been to VidCon and probably never will again, like
Yes.
I miss seeing my internet friends. And so I started this as an excuse to see them, but like all those sort of like weak ties, like the people who aren't
Mhm.
like my very very best friends, it's just like there are people that I haven't talked to in 2 years, because it was like it started being weird to just be like, how are you? Oh, bad. How are
Yeah.
you? Bad. Nothing's new. We're all just stuck. And so like a lot of my more peripheral friendships that are just as important have kind of
Yeah.
fallen off, and that maybe that's something that I need to do some rebuilding of too, and not feel weird to just text somebody after a couple of years and be like, hey, how's it going? I still care about you.
Those last few years, am I right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember seeing something about, and this was around the time of the election, that somebody was basically talking about, like, we know that like voting is not like the end all be all in terms of like community organization and the things that we want to see change, but it becomes so much easier. Like, we should never actually like look towards the government to be that salvation. We're looking towards each other, right?
Yeah.
But it becomes so much easier to do that sort of work when we're also not actively fighting against the government. And
Yeah.
that was like his pitch to like go, this is why you go vote. We understand that it's not going to be like the change that we all want to see, like top to bottom. But if we're not fighting on this front, we can be fighting on these like local grassroots sorts of fronts and like free up our
Right.
energy to do that. And so like that sort of like, and this is what this story was, right? It was like
Mhm.
a story of defeating evil at a local level.
Yeah.
Like a bunch of normal people came together to do this, and so like that idea of like organizing with the people around you and kind of looking to the change that you want to affect on that level, I think is the biggest message that you kind of take away from this as well.
Yeah. I thought that there was some like a couple of like useful nods where it was like Brooklyn was a city councilwoman, and there was a little bit of like distrust about that. Like, oh yeah, you used to be like for the people, and now you like now you're in City Hall, and now you're calling in favors, and now you're, this hot shot, and like we don't really feel like you're part of us anymore. But like I think is real. I think that that's a totally valid feeling. Coming from somebody who used to be just like electoral politics is the end all be all. This is the way that we fix things, guys. Like, come on, we've gotta vote and then call our senators, and that's the only way. I think that that's also can be a detriment to building that kind of the interpersonal relationships that we do, because like at a certain point, yeah, I think it's like it would be great to not be like actively fighting against the government, but also I no longer think that the government is going to come down from above and hand us the fix. In a way that the way that I used to kind of engage with these things and say like this is the only way, guys, actually can be harmful, in that like I used to sort of look down on some of the organizations that I volunteer with and stuff now and be like, well, that's so small scale. You're only working with this neighborhood. We need to be working with, the government, because that they can do the big things. And it's like we need both, and we need different people to devote attention to different parts of the structure for any of it to work. Sarah Shuffles says in chat, it also had a very global international feel too, since it was calling out how the corporate sameness and isolation is taking over in all cities, but still very much have the message of everyone can fight this from where they are. I also did kind of like how there were there was Sao Paulo and Hong Kong. Was that who also? That there were other cities that came in to help.
Yes.
Help New York, because I do think that it is. It's important to kind of, sorry about these dogs, understand our position in both a global community and a local community, and that it's also not helpful to just be like, all right, well, my community or nothing. Like, I don't care about the people around me. I don't care about the rest of the country because I live in a progressive city or whatever. It's like just as much as people saying like, well, Texas is passing really awful, regressive anti-trans and anti-reproductive rights laws. So the answer is just everybody should move out of Texas. Like, we actually can't, even if we're feeding into our local community, we can't just be like, well, screw everybody else. If, they should just make different choices for themselves if their place is bad. Yeah, it's all more connected than
yes.
I think. And it's a lot easier to feel like you're making change and deeper connections when you're working on that much smaller scale. That's definitely been true for me. I went from national political organizing to like I have not my current, because I moved across district lines, but like I have my city council person's cell phone number. Like, that's a completely different, completely different scale of influence, and being able to see like, oh, this, city ordinance actually got passed. Like, something is happening. Or not even like ordinances and laws and stuff, just like, if I am part of my local mutual aid organizing group, it's like, okay, you can see like this many grocery orders got delivered. Like, these people are fed. This is a tangible thing that I can see in front of me. In a way that I think is like super important, not just for like the actual impact that it has, but like the sort of way that it can kind of buoy you. That's a horrible word to say. Thing is like, we need wins. It is really, really demoralizing. I think about this all the time. Like, my job used to be like sending all those awful political texts you get. I got out of it because I understood that it was just making everybody miserable. But like, if you get all of those texts and emails that are just like, time is running out, it's all over. You know, this is Nancy Pelosi telling you that America is ruined. You know, like, that people actually need to get good news. Like, we can't just be under this constant barrage of terrible news, like, and just constantly trying to hold back the biggest atrocities that we can imagine. Like, we need to see physical, tangible results from our work to be able to keep at it, because otherwise it just, like, you run out of steam so fast.
Yes. Yep. Agreed. And everyone in chat is agreeing too.
Yeah. We are coming up to the end of our time together. Is there anything else, any thoughts, feelings, opinions about this book that we haven't gotten to that you want to get into?
I don't think so. I think we covered pretty much everything. I did mention that I listened to the audiobook, and I know you guys have already read it, but if you ever want to reread, the audiobook has a really great performance, and it also uses a bunch of like sound effects and things. And I don't know, it was weird to me to like think about how I would have been reading it, because even like when it was the like Lady in White or whatnot, like when it would say that she would laugh, the audiobook narrator had this like really maniacal laugh that she would do for her, and I'd be like, oh, like chills down my spine every time I heard it. So if you haven't read it yet, if you ever want to reread it, check out the audiobook, because I thought it was a really great performance.
I should maybe I'll do that for the sequel, because yeah, now that you say that, I'm like, oh, this does have the potential to be like a really cool full cast thing.
Yeah.
The laughs, and I got chills too.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. This was, I will say, for me, like, I know that you were saying like it wasn't really like a hugely plot driven book. It was really character driven, but like, I tend to read books that are 100% like a sad girl alone in her room. So like, to me, I was like, wow, so much plot. Personally.
It did have action. It did have action. But
yeah,
the plot
there
was
were
very
fight scenes, there were yeah. That I kind of like, I flew through this because like there was one night that I like stayed up really late reading it, and then the next day it was one of those situations where it's like, I have work to get done, but I'm just simply not going to be able to do it until I get this book read. Do you
yeah.
remember those days?
Well,
I
I
just need
know.
to get it away so that I can do something else. Otherwise, I'm just going to be thinking about it.
For sure.
Yeah, but I'm excited to now be able to move on to the next half of the duology and figure out if all of those loose ends get wrapped up, if they ever get Aislinn on their side.
I'm going to read it too. It definitely is not one that I'm like, I don't need to know. No, I need to know.
Yeah. Well, I guess on that note, we can end the chat. I know that for the last book, people got into the Discord and kept going, so feel free to do that. I think there is a link in the description to join the Discord if you're not in it already. There's a Hopepunk Book Club channel in there if you want to keep the conversation going. I know I will get in there once I start reading the next installment. But otherwise, it's been really lovely to hang out with all of you today and hear your thoughts and feel a little bit more hopeful about the world. Mari, if people want to continue to hear from you and get all of your wonderful thoughts about books from here on out, where can they find you?
On YouTube at My Name is Martinez, on TikTok at My Name is Martinez, on Twitter at My Name is Martinez, and occasionally on Instagram at My Name is Martinez.
Love a consistent username. I now use 3 different ones across the internet, and it's a mess. So thank you for making it. And thank you so much for joining us and for the conversation. It was really great to see you and catch up with you. Yeah. Speaking of kind of rebuilding our relationships post-pandemic.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a blast.
All right. Well, I will end the stream. Bye, everyone. Have a good weekend. I'll see you next week.